Hey everyone, it's Miss McClellan. Today we are going to talk about tariffs and trade in the Industrial Revolution. Before the Industrial Revolution, people really depended on local trade. So it wasn't like you were traveling long distances or sending your products or food to be traded. You pretty much went in your local village or province and you sold in your local market. So people who lived really close to you. If you happened to live near a city or a town, if you were a farmer, like you really prospered. You had lots of people to sell to. But most farmers lived in pretty isolated areas. So your market, the amount of people that you could sell to, was a pretty small pool. So there was a less demand for goods. So you weren't making a lot of money. Some farmers would travel long distances to reach larger markets, larger amounts of people. But transporting goods was really slow and expensive. You had to do it like by livestock, like horses or cows. They had to be moved on foot to city markets. And for this reason, there were lots of food shortages. Poor people often went hungry, while wealthy people, on the other hand, could afford to buy expensive imported goods like food. Um, so you all know that railways were a major development during the Industrial Revolution, and obviously this opened up new markets for farmers. Um, Grains, meat, and vegetables could be carried in large quantities to distant towns. Food shortages became less frequent, and prices dropped because produce was more readily available. If you have more of it, it's going to cost less. So the lower classes could afford better, more nutritious food. Um, so they went hungry less, they had better health overall. Um, the upper classes, they still spent a lot of money on sort of luxurious items, but most of the ships that were traveling and railways were filled with food that most people could afford. Great Britain, this is no surprise, had an early advantage over other countries because they did not have internal tariffs. And you remember that a tariff is a tax on trade. And so an internal tariff means that if you're trading within that country, like within Great Britain, you stay within Great Britain, you don't have to pay a tax every time you trade something. Um, in France, Napoleon abolished internal tariffs when he became consul in an effort to make trade within France less expensive. In Germany, you all know that the abolition of internal tariffs, when they got away with them, was pretty important because it came about when the Zollverein was established in 1834. That's when all the German states came together and decided to form an economic union. And basically all that means is they decided, okay, we're going to use the same currency, we're going to have the same laws related to trading. And one of the things that happened was that their internal tariffs were abolished. And so, not surprisingly, this meant that they had more industry. They were trading more often, they got more wealth. It was a good thing for everyone. We're going to be talking next class about capitalism. And capitalism is an economic system. That just means it's a certain way that a country can deal with all of its resources, all of its money, all of its goods. And so capitalism is an economic system that's based on the private ownership of the means of production and the accumulation of profit in a competitive market. Now, all that means is that in capitalism, trading happens between individuals. The government does not have a say. The government cannot determine how much something costs. The government cannot determine how often you can trade. It's just private individuals being able to trade whenever they want to. And the root word of capitalism is obviously capital, and that's just a word that means funds used by businesses to produce their products and services. So money that businesses need to make what they're making and do what they're doing. And if this is confusing to you, that's totally okay because we're going to spend a lot of time in class talking more about capitalism in more of like a sort of a hands-on way that you'll be able to understand a lot more. Capitalism is really important to the Industrial Revolution because the Industrial Revolution is sort of what made capitalism become as big as it is today, because capitalism is probably one of the most popular economic systems in the world today. The United States uses it. Anyone in the United States is free to go open a business. You're free to go shop at those businesses as you please, etc., etc. We'll talk a lot more about this. But it was important in the Industrial Revolution because it required investment. It required people to pay money to develop and use these new machines and technology. In the early years, this kind of money tended to be kept within families. So if you had money, you might loan it to a family member to help them do something, rather than loan it to a company to help them build a new machine or start a new service. Um, Individuals or small groups were typically unable to keep up with these investment demands. They didn't really have the money to keep investing in these new machines being built. So they established something called a joint stock company. Basically, it's a company that's owned by shareholders rather than an individual. So it's a lot of people who each of them own a little piece of a company. So that if that company goes south, like let's say in the Industrial Revolution, a popular thing to invest in would be the railroads or railway company. So if you personally spend a lot of money investing, thinking, okay, if I give them money on the front end to help them fund the railroads go and make lots of money, then I'm going to get lots of money in return. Well, that was risky because sometimes maybe what if the railroad company didn't do so well and you didn't get your money back, or you don't have enough money in the first place to give them. So in a joint stock company, it's lots of people contributing little pieces and everyone owns a little piece instead of someone giving a lot of money. And so if the company did go under or they did fail, you wouldn't lose everything. And again, I know that's not a super easy concept to grasp, so please, please write down any questions you have about capitalism or joint stock companies. We will address them in class. We're going to talk so much about this. You're going to be an expert on capitalism. In the meantime, make sure you've taken these notes, written your summary, and please, please write down any questions you have. Have a great day, and I'll see you in class.